What's up, you guys? Welcome to Walk the Line. We're hitting up UFC Edmonton. We're headed way out to the Midwest of Canada. Now, we rarely head up to Canada for a UFC event these days. And again, when I say we, I'm not saying I'm actually hopping on a flight and going to Canada, just so you guys understand that. I'm talking about the fact that we are headed to that arena because we're going to be tuned in to the television. We're going to be targeting some bets. We're going to be watching all these fights. That's what I mean by that, okay? Now, the UFC headed back up to Canada. It's not something that we see that frequent. I know there's a lot that's gone on in the last 4 years, but the UFC is back on track. They're traveling all around the world. And I think it's a shame because the point I'm making here is that years ago, there was two fighters that were representing Canada in the sport that were at the top of the game. When you talk about George St. Pierre, Rory McDonald, okay, if you were to ask me in 2024, if you were to ask me this back in like 2014 or whatever, if you were to ask me, would Canada be in the top 5 as far as nations being represented in the UFC, as far as top 15 fighters that are fighting for the belt, maybe some title holders, I would have said Canada would probably be in the mix. And I feel that Canadian mixed martial arts just completely fell off a cliff. I mean, you take a look at the UFC roster right now. You guys want to name some of the top fighters that are Canadian? You guys can go ahead because, I mean, we take a look at this card. You look at the top 4 fights. We don't even have a Canadian fighter fighting in the top 4 fights of an event taking place in Canada. Okay, you got Derek Lewis here in the co-main event. You got Aaron Blanchfield taking on Rose Namajunas. You got Brandon Moreno taking on Amir Albazi in the main event. Okay, you got a Mexican taking on an Egyptian. Okay, I mean, that says a little something about what's going on up there. And again, I'm not saying that to shed a negative light on Canada. I'm just a little disappointed, and I would like to see the sport pick back up there because back in the day, there was a lot of solid fighters coming out of there. Now, there is a fighter fighting on this card that actually does have some star power, a promising fighter that's representing Canada. He's fighting on the main card. Unfortunately, he's coming into this fight off of a loss. It was a tough loss, and I'm sure it hurt a lot of your guys' pockets, and it was very tough to watch as Mikey Malott broke down in the 3rd round against Neil Magny when he was completely controlling that fight. He'll have an opportunity to get the train back on the tracks here. He's taking on Trevin, Giles. Other than that, as far as Canada goes on this card, you're talking about some tough journeymen. They're fun to watch. You're talking about Charles Jourdain, who will be taking on Victor Henry. It should be a fun fight. Charles Jourdain is always fun to watch, but we understand how far he's going to take his game at this point in time, right? I mean, we understand that. Aiemann Zahabi, the brother of Firas Zahabi, one of the best coaches to ever do it. Aiemann Zahabi is a fighter that consistently overachieves. He's a crafty fighter with a very high IQ. He's taking on Pedro Munhoz. That's a good fight there. Besides that, you got Sidey, who's a young up-and-coming fighter. We'll see what he could do. Chad Anheliger, another fighter that's just fun and kind of lucky to be hanging around in the UFC. He's fun to watch, but ain't going to push it that far. And then we do have Jamey-Lyn Horth, who is 1-1 in the UFC now, and she's a fighter that has a little bit more time and potential to maybe make some noise. So take that for what you will. I like the Youssef Zalal versus Jack Shore fight. That's a sleeper fight, too, that will be taking place in the prelims. So this is a little bit of a hangover card in the sense that we just had UFC 308 take place, which was a huge event. Hopefully you guys killed it like I did. And make sure you're following me on Instagram so you guys can see the bets that I target for these cards. I'm always posting the bets that I target there. I'm putting them up in the story, posting them on my page and whatnot, and including the losses. We hit 3 of our 4 targets, had a huge event, almost profited 10 units on the card. We were coming into that event off a clean sweep prior to that, and the card before that, we almost had the clean sweep. I mean, we've been on absolute fire. I just got to shed a little bit of light there, guys, because the last 3 to 4 months have been one of the hottest streaks that I've ever had since I've been doing this thing seriously. So keep an eye on the momentum that we're bringing into this event. And the point I'm making is you can't get caught sleeping on an event like this. You still got to crunch your homework. You got to break down the tape, and you got to be making sure you're getting solid value on the bets that you guys are targeting, okay? And if you are up, if you've been bringing in some profits as of recently, do not get reckless with your profits there. Don't just start throwing them around recklessly because you will lose them quickly. Make sure you guys slow it down and make sure you guys profit on this event because that's what I'm going to do. All right, guys? And if you're following me on Instagram, make sure you're following me on Twitter as well. I'm on Twitter at The MMA Teller. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel if you're new. And the last thing I'll leave you with before we jump into this first fight, if you're looking to sign up to a new sports book, reach out to me. I'll give you my referral link to BetUS. You will get a 150% match on your first 3 deposits, okay? No other sports books are giving those types of deposit matches. Reach out to me. It'll be worth your guys' while. All right, guys, leave you with that, and let's go talk some action. Let's get into it.
The teller.
We head over to the women's flyweight division where we have Jamey-Lyn Horth taking on Ivana Petrović. Now, these fighters do have some similarities. The first thing that stands out to me, both have a limited amount of professional experience. They both just took their first ever professional loss, which just happened recently inside the UFC. Within their first 2 fights inside the UFC, both fighters just have 2 fights in the octagon. They're a little bit different though, right? Ivana Petrović, she took an L in her debut and then bounced back with the victory in her last fight, while Jamey-Lyn Horth had that UFC debut victory and then just took a split decision loss to Veronica Hardy. Now, the Veronica Hardy loss actually is one of the better performances you could probably pull up on Jamey-Lyn Horth, because at least you know she can go out there and be competitive with the high-level fighter like Hardy. Veronica Hardy, since making her return to the UFC, has looked very well. I think Dan Hardy has been coaching her very, very well, and I think that if you could hang with Veronica Hardy, at least it shows that you're a capable fighter. Well, with Petrović, we'll talk about that in a second. Now the debut victory over Haley Cowan, that doesn't really say much to me. Also, both fighters champions on the regional scene. Jamey-Lyn Horth was the champ over in LFA. That was her last fight before getting the opportunity to fight in the UFC. Now, Ivana Petrović, now she took that loss against Luana Carolina there, and then she followed that up with a submission over Na Liang. If you guys know how I feel about Na Liang, you know I'm not putting too much merit into that victory. Na Liang is a fighter. She's crazy. She's aggressive early on, but she breaks down. She's a complete flake, and she gets finished by everybody. So take that sub for what you will. You could talk about the Wozniak fight that's on YouTube. You could pull that up there if you want to watch that. You could talk about that there for a second. Made it to the championship round. She pulled off the sub. Don't forget, though, she was actually the fighter that was getting put down on her back in the first round there. Meanwhile, Petrović grappling is one of her strengths. And in fact, I will say if she's going to have success in this fight, I do believe that she has to have success with her grappling. I think she needs to change levels and mix things up. If it's just a straight striking match, I favor Jamey-Lyn Horth. We already talked about her having the crowd behind her. She's also a fighter that is shown to be more active there. Okay, landing 3.97 strikes per minute compared to the 2.19 of Petrović. Petrović is a fighter that's kind of stuck in the mud a little bit. As McGregor once said, she does kind of show symptoms of being a little plotty and just a little lethargic there. Jamey-Lyn Horth, even though her name sounds like she's a fighter that should be moving very slow, kind of has that look in her face too, but she's actually decently athletic. She moves kind of quick out there, but not overly impressed with what I've seen from either fighter, and I don't really expect either fighter to make a run in this division, if I'm being blatantly honest with you guys here. But I do like Jamey-Lyn Horth to get the job done here. I think that she'll win a decision. It could play out closely. Could be a split decision victory for her, but I'm actually leaning more towards a unanimous decision. I think that Horth can solidify 2 rounds. Now, here's the thing. We pull up the betting line. Jamey-Lyn Horth is a minus 210 currently on BetUS, opened up as a minus 200. Okay, she's a 2-1 favorite. Do you want to chalk up those kind of odds on a fight that probably goes to the judges' scorecards and should play out relatively close? I'm not really liking that line. I'm not. And like I said, if Petrović can get this fight down to the mat, she's shown to have pretty good jiu-jitsu, and she can control you down there. She could rain down some ground and pound and whatnot. And that's one thing you got to worry about a little bit if you're Horth. Not to say that Horth is just completely inadequate down in the mat. She has a decently well-rounded skill set, but I think that Petrović could have an edge there, and I'm not willing to chalk up 2-1 odds here, but I do like Jamey-Lyn Horth to win a unanimous decision, snagging up 2 of the 3 rounds. We head over to the bantamweight division. We have Chad Anheliger taking on Cody Gibson. Both these fighters have some similarities as well. Both fighters 37 years old. That's what stands out to us right off the rip. They are at the tail ends of their careers. They both run a 2-fight losing skid before bouncing back with a victory in their last fights. And of course, that victory was extremely important for both of them. I would argue to you, if either of them would have lost that fight, they would have been cut by the UFC. So they're hanging on to their UFC careers by some coattails there. All these fights are extremely important for them. And although they're 37, I will say that they've looked decent physically in the cage as of recently. So, I mean, I think they have a little bit left to offer here. Cody Gibson is a fighter. When you take a look at his losses, right, he's 20-10 as a pro. When you take a look at his losses, I hold the level of competition a little higher than some of Anheliger's losses. And we'll talk about Anheliger's losses here in a second. But even dating to the first stint that Cody Gibson had in the UFC, where he made his UFC debut against Aljamain Sterling. That was a fight that played out decently close. He bounced back with a first-round knockout over Johnny Bedford, who eventually goes to the bare knuckle scene. Took losses to fighters like Manny Gumbarian, Douglas Silva de Andrade. All right, then he goes to the regional scene. You guys may have even seen him perform over on Eagle FC, Khabib's promotion, where he took a loss to Ray Borg. Ray Borg, you guys know he's the real deal. Also, he had a victory at XMMA over John Dodson. That's a high-level fighter there too as well. So, I mean, he's been grinding on the regional scene. Eventually, he got that opportunity to fight on The Ultimate Fighter on Tough 31. That was the one where we had the veterans versus the youngsters, and he had a lot of success on that show. Went out there and knocked out Mando Gutierrez, also submitted Rico Disculio, okay, and then took losses to Brad Katona and Miles Johns after that. Again, high-level opponents. I consider those guys solid fighters, whether you want to admit it or not. I mean, I know Katona's not the most exciting, but Katona is, he can give you problems in the cage. Johns is an underrated fighter as well. He ends up facing my old arch nemesis, Brian Kelleher. He retires him there, so you got to tip the hat to him. He looked good in that last fight. Meanwhile, Chad's been looking good as of recently too, or he looked good in that last fight. He got the decision victory over Gregorio, who was a dangerous fighter early on, but he shows he has no gas tank. And if you guys didn't know, he's a fellow Greek, and I've talked to him before. Nothing but respect towards Gregorio, but he's a fighter that I don't really know if he has it. I think he kind of, I don't want to say lucked out, but he's fortunate the way things played out for him on Dana White's Contender Series, where he got that early KO. He could knock you out early, but if his opponent has a smart strategy, they could weather the storm and they could really take over a fight with him. So, that's what Chad was able to do to him there. Before that, though, subbed by Jose Johnson, took a decision loss to Ala Tang. And the thing that I worry about is when you look back at some of the losses he had back in like 2014, I know they were a long time ago, but lower level fighters were going out there and subbing him. And he was almost more of a physically prime fighter back then. But I guess he's just a fighter that's peaked towards the later half of his career. And I will say he looked good in that last fight. But Gibson is a different type of fighter. He's not a fighter that's just going to gas out like Gregorio did. And Cody Gibson's a fighter that has some solid grappling to stifle that type of attack from Anheliger. Not to say that Chad can't also throw hands. We've seen him get some pretty solid knockouts as well. He's a tricky striker. And we also saw that on Dana White's Contender Series, where he pulled off the upset against Moon Gafarov, a fighter that gassed out, and Chad was able to style on there. But let me also just note the knockout victory that he had over Brady Haston, who's a tough fighter. Okay, so he's shown to be a little tricky. He switches stances. He can touch you up there. But look at the massive reach advantage that Cody has. He has what, a 6.5 inch reach advantage. I think that he could really use that to his advantage. I would like to see him fight from the outside a little bit. I think he can keep this fight standing if he wants to. And I have a little bit more faith in Cody Gibson getting the job done here. Now, do I have enough faith to find value on a line that's at -180 next to his name? I think you could be pushing it. Where it opened at, that's where you want it to be, in my opinion. I mean, -145, obviously a much more bargain type of line. Even -155, 160, much more reasonable. I think it's starting to get to a point where you're pushing it, especially at -190. I think that the value would be on the dog. And where this line stands, I believe that the value is on the underdog here in Chad, who you can grab right now and bet US right around a +150, +160. I think this fight's a little bit of a closer match than what that line's saying. I put a little bit more faith in Cody, though. Like I said, I like the frame that he has. He's the larger fighter. Well, he won't gas out, but I'm not really willing to chalk that up. I like the value in the dog here. I will personally be sitting back, just enjoying this fight and seeing how it plays out. This is a great fight, guys. We got Serhiy, Sidey taking on Garrett, Armfield. Both fighters just 28 years old. They're both coming off some tough losses. We'll talk a little bit more about both those losses here in a second, but understand they're coming into this fight with their full tank of gas. These boys are ready to roll, just 28 years old, extremely motivated right now. Sidey took an L against Ramon Tavares in the rematch. Remember, he got the knockout over Ramon Tavares the first time around. That fight took place in Dana White's Contender Series. It was an early stoppage, even though he landed some nice shots there. They run it back. Almost all of the media scored that fight for Sidey. So understand that. And you guys know I said I thought he won that fight as well. In fact, that was a small official play of mine on the night. I was disappointed we didn't get the nod there, but he truly did enough to take that fight. Go take a look at what the media scores were. And Ramon Tavares is a nasty up-and-comer, okay? He has some nasty striking. We saw Tavares have a knockout over Cortavius Romeus, who's a fighter that we are keeping an eye on. He just got a contract on this recent season of Dana White's Contender Series. But Tavares is the real deal. He's getting in work with Uriah Faber right now, and he's got some, if you don't know about him, he's got some issues he's battling as far as where he's from in Jayville and whatnot. He needs to get out of there. He needs to start really taking the game serious because he's a promising young fighter. But Sidey is coming into this fight very motivated and very frustrated that he didn't get the nod there. And he pushed through adversity through that fight. He pushes a crazy pace in his fights. Now, he will have a little bit of a reach advantage here against Armfield, but he does not fight from the outside, man. He's pressuring. He's looking to get on the inside, push you up against the cage, and then combos on you. So that's one thing that I would say actually could favor Armfield a little bit, because Armfield is a nasty boxer. We've seen him showcase his striking as of recently, and he's a dude that can actually put you out. We saw him have a lot of success on Katona. I know he didn't get the finish there, but he was working him on the feet. He was coming into that fight off a first-round knockout over Kazama, which Kazama just recently had a little bounce-back victory. But you take a look at some of Armfield's losses. Like, look at his last one. We talk about how he's motivated coming into this fight. That last loss that he had to Haston, he was winning that fight. He broke down in the third round, and he did get submitted, but Haston pushes a crazy pace with the grappling. Armfield was defending all throughout the beginning of that fight. The takedown defense was on par, above par. It was looking sharp. And if he can go out there and he could stuff takedowns and keep fights on the feet, he could have a lot of success. And even actually, I think that you're going to start to see him have a little bit of success offensively with his grappling. He's been putting in a lot of work in that department of his fight game, training with fighters like Trey Ogden, who you guys know has been having a lot of success training over at Marathon MMA. And you take a look at his losses. They're against high-level fighters. He got subbed by David Onama. He also took a sub against Mateo Vogel, who Vogel is another fighter that has a victory over Sidey as well. That's a common opponent there. Mateo Vogel, a fighter that's not really, he wasn't able to put it together as of recently. He was on the verge of getting a contract into the UFC, and he's been run into some trouble, but more of a grappling-based fighter who was taking advantage of fighters early on in their career, needs to figure his whole game out. And then we'll just also note he has Armfield has a loss against Ronnie Lawrence, who is a high-level fighter who's parted ways with the fight game here for a little bit. He's battling some issues outside fighting. So, listen, this is a great fight. Like I said, I expect this to be a slugfest. I think this fight is going to be an extremely close fight. It's really hard to say who's going to win this fight. I think that Armfield can counter Sidey. Sidey's very aggressive, and I think that Armfield can counter him as he comes in to the inside. I'm curious to see if somebody shoots a takedown, or if anybody really has an edge as far as the grappling goes. It's really hard to put my finger on who would have that advantage. I've broken a lot of tape down on these fighters, almost all available tape, and I think that it's really hard to say who's going to show up on the night and have the better grappling. And I think that this fight will take place in the feet anyway. I expect it to be a striking match, and it's pretty much a toss-up as far as I'm concerned. I've been back and forth with who I was going to pick for this fight. I was going to pick Armfield. I actually started with Sidey. I was going to pick Armfield. I've settled back in on the Sidey side. One thing that really pushed me to take him is I love the pace that he pushes, and I like the way in his last fight he was looking better as the fight was going on. He was all bloodied up, but he pushed through all that adversity, and I kind of felt like Garrett kind of was tripping over his shoelaces in that last round. He kind of folded, and that's why he got caught with that sub. I know it's a different stylistic matchup, but we may see Armfield struggle a little bit in the late round, not just getting taken down, but maybe Sidey just pushes that pace in him and takes the fight. And I expect this fight to be a barn burner. I like Sidey here. The pressure is nasty. Both these guys putting a very high output out there. Sidey so far showcasing a 5.16 strikes per minute. Garrett with the 5.59. These guys are going to go at it. And I will side with the Canadian there too, with that hometown advantage going his way. He opened up as a -160 on BetUS. The line's going the other way. He's now -155, and that's understandable because this line should be closer. Okay, I have this fight capped more like Sidey being like a -130. Okay, so again, I know I'm kind of spewing at that same type of narrative for the fights, but I'm giving you what I got here. I'm giving it to you how I'm breaking down the tape, what I'm seeing. That's what I'm giving you guys, and I think that the value has to be on the underdog here. But Sidey rightfully should be a slight favorite. Again, you're banking on him just to be that horse that's coming around the railings as the track's winding around. He's the horse that's going to push a little bit harder, in my opinion. He has a great gas tank, and I'll say that he wins a split decision. And as far as if we see a knockout, I think that we could potentially see a knockout come from either side. Both these fighters have shown that they can go out there and get those types of finishes. The majority of their victories coming by way of knockout, right? Sidey having 7 of his 10 victories come by way of knockout. Garrett with 6 of his 10 victories coming by way of knockout. The X factor there is neither man has ever been knocked out. Okay, but this is going to be a high-paced fight. I'm going to say Sidey wins a split decision, maybe something like that. A very close fight, but it gets the nod, and a fight that's just an absolute war. Got some ranked heavyweight action set to take place here. Alexandr Romanov taking on Rodrigo Nascimento. Romanov ranked 13th in this division. Rodrigo Nascimento ranked 15th. It kind of shows you how shallow the heavyweight division can be, because these fighters, they've been losing a lot of fights as of recently, or at least Nascimento comes into this fight off a loss before that on a little bit of a win streak, but Romanov losing a lot of fights. And these fighters really haven't been that active either. But this will be an interesting matchup. Romanov, a fighter that was completely exposed as his career started to progress. In the beginning of his UFC career, he looked to just be an absolute wrecking machine. I mean, you think about how his UFC career started off. He's going out there just finishing these dudes nice and early, right? Goes out there, submits Rock Martinez in the second round, finishes Marcos Rogerio de Lima, which that was a more impressive victory too, getting that sub in the first round. He's going out there just getting these nasty subs too. I think that was the one, right? The forearm choke that was the one where he was on top of him, kind of in side control, just bullying him, just smashing his forearm into his face, getting the choke there. He's a mammoth fighter. He's huge. He has some solid wrestling skills, but we saw in the Juan Espino fight, which remember, this was a loss. And what a shame Juan Espino disappeared from the fight game, the Spaniard heavyweight fighter that has a very polished wrestling background. He disappeared from the fight game. He was a fighter that could have made a run in this division. He won that fight. It was one of the most awkward situations. He was completely taken over the fight, won the second round. The third round starts off, and I believe it was a low blow, right? There was a low blow that happened. The fight was stopped, and then they go to the judges' scorecards and they count the third round, and they judge that round based off like a couple seconds of what happened, and nothing happened, and somehow they scored it for Romanov. And I actually had an official play in Romanov, and I was very happy about it, but I know that we didn't deserve to get the W there, and I know if that fight would have progressed, Espino was breaking him down, outstriking him, and we saw then that Romanov has major cardio issues, and he's a flake of a fighter. Okay, he goes out there, gets victories over Jared Vandera and Chase Sherman, low-level fighters, and then it all unravels, okay? Against Tybura, Alexander Volkov, you start to see who he really is. We saw it again in his last fight against Jailton Almeida. He got subbed in the first round. He did sneak in a decision victory over Blagoy Ivanov, who was an old man at the time. He can't even bend his knees, the poor guy, when he was going into that fight. He was a stiff old man. He snuck in a victory there. I'm telling you guys, I still have my back turned on Romanov, 33 years old. You also note all the weight that Romanov has put on in the later half of his UFC career. And he was a fighter that already showed to have bad cardio. And then now he comes in, steps on the scales, just looking humongous. Okay, that's something that turns me off on his part as well. And Rodrigo Nascimento is a fighter that comes into the sport of MMA with the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background. He has high-level Jiu-Jitsu. He's also showcased that his boxing skills are legit. You take a look at his line of work. He's coming in off a third-round knockout loss against Derek Lewis. But Derek Lewis, come on, man. He's the knockout king. We'll be talking about him here in a second. Before that, he was on a 4-fight winning streak, getting victories over fighters like Dontel Mays, Alir Latifi, Tanner Bozier, Alan Budat. That fight was overturned, but remember, he had the knockout against the cage there, had that standing knockout, but it was overturned due to, it might have been a marijuana failed test. I forget exactly what it was, but and I do have to just note, the Chris Daukaus loss that he took, he was knocked out in that fight. That was one of the biggest underdog plays that we've ever hit. I think we caught Daukaus at almost plus 500. He was a huge underdog. Just to kind of highlight some of the hype that Nascimento had in the early part of his UFC career, people were very high on him, and there were some huge lines next to his name. And obviously people have taken a step back since, but I think this is a solid stylistic matchup for him. I really think that he can go out here and take over this fight in the later rounds. I just don't trust Romanov in the late rounds. Romanov may be a little bit dangerous early on, but another thing too, I'm not overly concerned with the striking of Romanov, which I'm not expecting Romanov to drop Nascimento and get a knockout in similar fashion to what Daukaus did, so we could check that off. And I think that Nascimento has the jiu-jitsu skills to avoid Romanov having that early success. And I think that Nascimento, even though he's a fighter that's needs to continue to show growth in his cardio and performances in the later rounds at times, I still think that I put more stock into what he could do there than a Romanov. And I will take Rodrigo Nascimento to win this fight. He opened up as a -135. He's now -120. That line movement is interesting to me. It seems people just want to hold on to that initial hype of Romanov. They like that early bulldozing onslaught that he brings to the game, but I don't know. You better hope you have some early success. Otherwise, you'll be at the edge of your seat in the later rounds. And give me Rodrigo Nascimento here. This line is essentially at pick-em odds right now. A slight lean on Nascimento. Could be some value on that line there. A more recently added fight to the card taking place in the featherweight division. It's a good one. Jack Shore taking on Youssef Zalal. Let's talk about Zalal here for a second. This is a fighter that was cut by the UFC, and he has since been giving another opportunity, and he has performed, right? Since coming back to the UFC, he is now 2-0, and if you are paying attention to what he was doing outside of the UFC, he was having a lot of success. He was taking some kickboxing fights, some MMA fights as well. He was getting finishes left and right, fighting over at Sparta, the promotion Sparta, who not only puts together MMA fights, but they also put those kickboxing fights together. And just a great learning experience for Zalal, who's still such a young fighter. And when you understand, when he was fighting in the UFC initially, you take a look, right? This is a fighter that made his debut back in 2020. He was around 24 years old. He was very young, and he was stringing off victories, okay? He was stringing off victories. Coming from LFA, he comes into the UFC, he's 3-0. Had a victory over my boy Jordan Griffin there and my boy Peter Barrett. You guys know we interviewed both those guys on MMA Live Discussion. Great dudes. And then he falls into the lap of Ilia Topuria. I know none of you guys want to hear me talk about Ilia Topuria right now because I've been making your guys' ears bleed. Because I've been making your guys' ears bleed with my praise for Topuria. Some of you guys have been really upset with me on Instagram with some of the content I've been putting. What you guys don't understand is I have a great deal of respect for Holloway. It's just Topuria as him, and it's just been exciting for me to watch. And shout out to everybody that has thicker skin out there that could take some of my content. And for you guys that can't handle it, you're probably not even listening to me right now. You guys are probably under a blanket in your room, shivering up right now. But Ilia Topuria is him, and I told you guys that, okay? Now, Zalal lost a decision to Topuria, one of the few men to ever go to the judges' scorecards with him, okay? I mean, Max Holloway couldn't even go to the judges' scorecards with him, a fighter that's never been knocked out. All right, after that, he loses to Sang-Woo Choi and Sean Woodson. Woodson is a nasty fighter, an underrated fighter. The Choi loss I wasn't crazy about. Ends up going to a draw with Damon Blackshear, who's another underrated fighter, not a bad fighter. The UFC part ways with him. That's we talked about the line of work that he's been doing since then. And then he makes that return fight in the octagon, takes out Billy Q via submission. Then he goes out there and submits Jarno Arens. Okay, now Billy Q, a crafty veteran, but way up there in age. If you want to play devil's advocate, we could pump the brakes a little bit right now based on the fact that Jarno Arens and Billy Q are not the highest level of fighters. They're not bad fighters. You guys know I praised them before in one way or another, but you could pump the brakes a little bit. And Jack Shore is a fighter that, although he's only won one of his last 3 fights, he's a fighter that he's not a bad fighter. He has good grappling. He's decently polished with his technique as far as the stand-up goes. Not a lot of pop on his strikes and whatnot, but he can go out there and decision you. And, since joining the UFC, one thing that stood out to me is he's definitely fought a lot of low-level competition, and he's had a lot of success defeating fighters like Nolan Hernandez, who I believe is a common opponent of Youssef's. I think he fought him over in LFA, but submitted Aaron Phillips, Hunter Azure, Ludovic Shalinian. The highest caliber victory really is Timur Valiyev, who's not a bad fighter, but was undersized and never really could cut it in the UFC. The Makwan Americani, just a wild dude towards the end of his career. I mean, and then getting finished by Joe Anderson Brito and Ricky Simone, who are those fighters that are on that next step, right? When he fights those fighters that are on that next level, not only does he lose, he gets finished. Okay, so and Zalal he's that type of fighter, man. I think that Zalal could be live to get a finish here with all the momentum that he brings into the cage. I think that Zalal has proven to be a fighter that has a higher ceiling. I think he's the better fighter right now. I think he's the more well-rounded fighter. He's very technical with his striking. He could really push the pace on you with his striking, and he's more than polished to handle anything that Jack wants to throw his way as far as the grappling goes. I do like Youssef Zalal here. I like Zalal to get the job done. I just think he's the more complete fighter that's coming into this fight extremely confident in himself, and I see him winning this fight. I think the real question is he going to get a finish? And then also, if you want to just analyze the betting line here for a second, I will say this. With Jack Shore being almost a 2-1 underdog, that could have you scratching your head for some possible value, because I know I've been a little harsh on Shore, but again, as we started this fight segment off, I did say, I mean, Shore does bring some tools to the table, and he can go out there and sneak off his little decision victories. I know he's very motivated to come in here and get a W. He knows that he has to start putting in some work. His back is up against the wall. All right. He doesn't want to get cut from the UFC. I'm not sure if he's right at that point right now, but getting 2-1 odds on him, is there value there? I don't know, man. It's hard for me to point you guys towards that direction because I just think that Zalal is just hitting on all cylinders. And even though the line is kind of high, as he's a minus 235 right now, I think that Zalal wins the fight. And what I'm really trying to make my mind up on is he going to get that finish? Which can come a variety of ways. I mean, he could push the pace, maybe land some big strikes and set up a sub. I'm going to say Zalal wins a decision. I'm going to say he wins a decision. He controls the clinch, pushes him against the cage, and just is a step ahead everywhere this fight goes and gets the nod as it goes to the judges' scorecards. Charles Jourdain taking on Victor Henry here. Fight taking place in the bantamweight division. Charles Jourdain, just 28 years old. Seems like he would be older, right? He had an early start to his UFC career. He's been through some wars. He's taken some damage, but still, you got to like the fact that he's just 28 compared to Victor's 37, even though Victor Henry is a fighter that doesn't look to be 37, not only physically, but when he's in the cage, he's moving pretty good, man. He's a pretty nimble fighter. This is a fight that's taking place in the bantamweight division. You don't see a lot of 37-year-old fighters fighting in this division, so keep an eye on that. Even though he's been looking good in there, you have to start to expect to see a decline in his game in the cage with just how old he is. But Charles Jourdain, he's been having some unfortunate performances, right? I mean, fortunate for me when I had Gene Silva at plus odds. I love that, but that was a tough loss for him. He got knocked out there. Before that, took the loss to Sean Woodson. Those are two high caliber fighters back to back. Before that, victories over Ricardo Ramos and Kron Gracie. And then he was on a 2-fight losing skid before that, but against tough fighters too, in Nathaniel Wood and Shane Burgos. Okay, so I mean, those two wins are sandwiched in with 4 losses. He has his back up against the wall too. He needs a victory. He's going to be extremely motivated for this fight. He's a fighter that is shown to be very well-rounded. He has solid kickboxing skills. He also is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He could hold his own down on the mat. You take a look at his 15 victories, 8 of them coming by way of KO, 5 of them coming by way of sub. Victor Henry is a fighter that's never been finished, so it's not going to be easy to go out there and get a finish. This is a fight that I do expect to go to the judges' scorecards. I think that this is a fight that could play out very entertainingly, as both of these fighters have been involved in a lot of those types of fights. They push a high pace. I mean, look at that number next to Victor Henry's name, landing 8.34 strikes per minute. Okay, he will really push the pace on you, and if that's the type of a fight he's going to bring to Jourdain, Jourdain's going to meet him, and he'll start throwing heavy, and then these guys will trade. I think this is a very close fight. I like the fact that Jourdain will have the crowd behind him. At this point in time, you're almost creeping up to halfway through the card. I think the crowd's starting to get into it. Jourdain's a fun fighter to back, and I think that when he lands, the crowd might be just making, I really expect that to be the case. They'll be making more noise. I think that could help him if this fight goes to the judges' scorecards, which I think it could. If we see a finish, I'm actually thinking that it's Henry that would actually be getting that finish. Jourdain comes into this fight off of that knockout loss, so he's been damaged a little bit. And then, the majority of his other losses are coming by way of decision, but, took some serious damage against Gene Silva. And even in some of the fights that he's had as of recently that he wasn't finished, we've seen him take damage, right? We've seen him get dropped. We've seen him get hurt. And that's the thing that you got to be a little bit worried about. Although not overly concerned with Victor Henry's finishing ability. 24 pro fights, just 6 knockouts. I think this fight goes to the judges' scorecards, and I'm going to say the hometown boy gets the job done here. I'm going to say in a close fight, he sneaks this one in, and this is a fight where I think that Jourdain can get things back on track. He needs to. Now, it's not a layup. This fight could play out competitively, but I'll back the hometown boy there. This line is at pick'em odds. You're picking your poison here, and I will pick Charles Jourdain to win a decision in another fight that should play out entertainingly. We got ranked action taking place in the women's flyweight division. Ariane Lipski, number 13, taking on the number 14th, Jasmine Jasudavicius. Jasmine, I mean, this girl, she really pushes the pace with her grappling in her fights, man. She's one of the more grappling-oriented fighters. You know what I'm saying? She's just constantly pushing you up against the cage. She's looking to get takedowns, looking to break you. It paid dividends in her last fight against Fatima Klein, a fighter that I'm actually still high on. She was undersized in that matchup, but she's a technical fighter. She has that jiu-jitsu base. Her striking's good. I think that Fatima Klein will bounce back And I do put some merit into that victory for Jasmine. I liked what she was able to do. She dug deep. And like I said, her grappling can be a problem for a lot of girls in this division. She was able to sub Priscilla Cachoeira before that. She took the L to Tracy Cortez before that. That was a fight that played out pretty close, but the difference in that fight is you saw that Jasmine is limited with her striking. Okay, she is very limited. And even in the Klein fight, remember, Klein was hurting her late in that fight before eventually being taken down. She was touching her up. As far as the striking defense goes, Jasmine is low level, okay? But the pace, cardio, and grappling is high level. That's the type of fighter you're working with when you're talking Jasmine. Had a victory over Miranda Maverick. That's a solid W, and she was breaking her, taking her down all throughout that fight. Her other loss was against Natalia Silva. Natalia Silva, one of the girls that's looking to really make a run in this division, could be fighting for the belt in the near future. All right, so we'll highlight the Kay Hansen victory for everyone that's signed up to her OnlyFans, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt who parted ways with the UFC. I think she'll eventually make her way back, but I don't know. For now, I think OnlyFans is paying her bills pretty good. And, here we are. Ariane Lipski, a fighter that was probably underrated at once upon a time, and she's proven to be better than a lot of us thought that she was once upon a time. She's a fighter that could pull subs off on you. We saw what she just did to Casey O'Neill, pulling off that arm bar. She's gone in there. She's landed some heavy strikes in the feet as well. Some ups and downs. There's no question about that. I mean, she's a fighter that's been finished quite a bit. She was actually finished by Antonina Shevchenko. That's not a good look, right? The lower Shevchenko of the two sisters, of course. But, this is a fight where I'm not going to turn my back on Jasmine. I'll make this one simple, guys. I'll cut to the chase here. I just think that the pressure that Jasmine brings into the octagon when she's fighting, if you don't have an answer for that, if you're not very polished with your footwork and your takedown defense and your cardio, if you can't really put that together, you're going to have a long night in the cage. And I think that Jasmine can go out here and once again just kind of push through some of the early damage that Ariane will throw her way. Early on, I think that Ariane Lipski is going to be dangerous. She has some pop on her shots, 6 KOs out of 17 victories, 4 subs. I mean, as far as women's MMA goes, I mean, and specifically for a fighter that's had a good amount of fights in the UFC, it's a decent percentage as far as getting finishes. And again, she does have pop. Trust me when I tell you that, especially recently. Her Muay Thais look pretty sharp. I think she'll be a little bit of a threat to Jasmine early on in this fight, but I think that Jasmine will do what she does best when she's hitting on all cylinders. She'll push through. She might get bloodied up a little bit, but she'll eventually take this fight over. She'll have the crowd behind her, and I think you got to go with Jasmine to win this fight. I'll say via decision. I don't think that she breaks Lipski and gets that finish. I'm going to say it's a decision victory. She opened up as a minus 160. She's now minus 220. Big time action coming in on Jasmine. It's understandable. People like having a fighter, especially in women's MMA, that could really dictate the pace of a fight, get takedowns, and control the fight. And I understand it. Give me Jasmine Jasudavicius to win this fight via unanimous decision. Aiemann Zahabi taking on Pedro Munhoz. How about Pedro Munhoz? Now 38 years old. There's no question he's at the tail end of his career. I tip the hat to Pedro. He's always been a fighter that's been fun to watch when he's in the octagon. I'll let you guys know right now, he is also as advertised. He's a great dude. I bumped into him at a BKFC event that took place in Fort Lauderdale. Ended up watching the main event with him, shoulder to shoulder. Had a brewski in my hand. I believe he had a brewski in his hand. He was jumping up and down. There was a crazy knockout in the main event of that event, and him and some of the top team boys he was with, they were all enjoying that as I was with my boys. And just really a class act is Pedro. He's a family man. He's a solid dude. Like I said, he is as advertised, but he's 38 years old. He's coming into this fight on a 2-fight losing skid, and he's a fighter that has been very hittable. Okay, really throughout his entire UFC career, he's been a fighter. Okay, he's never been finished, right? He walks through all those strikes looking to land his own damage, but it's tough to back Pedro when his fights are going to the judges' scoring cards. I mean, he's absorbing 6.23 strikes in the octagon compared to only landing 5.32. Not that 5.32 strikes per minute is a bad number, but being landed on a whole extra strike per minute, that's a problem. And that's led to a lot of decision losses for him. We did fade him. As of recently, we faded him in a major way when he took on Marlon Chito Vera. Cashed in big on that one. Now, Aiemann Zahabi is a fighter that is being absorbed at 3.61 while only landing 3.43. So interesting, another fighter that's absorbing more than he's landing. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. We'll see which fighter is pushing the volume here. But I don't know, man. I have my question marks in regards to how much Pedro has left to offer the game. He's coming off that loss against Kyler Phillips, who just had a major letdown in his fight against Rob Font. Pedro wasn't able to emulate any of the same things that Font was able to do there, being a crafty veteran and teaching Phillips a lesson. We talked about the Chito Vera victory. He did have a victory over Chris Gutierrez. That was a solid W there. There's been a lot of L's going on, though. The Sean O'Malley fight essentially never happened. It was an eye poke, but we know which way that fight was going to go. A lot of L's going on for Pedro Munhoz, and his back is against the wall. I really wonder if he loses this fight, if the UFC kind of gives him a hint, hey, maybe hang him up or something like that. Zahabi, a fighter that's been extremely inactive throughout the years, but take note, he's coming into this fight on a 4-fight winning streak, and he's a fighter that has came in as an underdog in the past, and he showed up. Specifically in his last fight, he was around a plus 500. Remember that one, guys, where I had an official play? I threw 1 unit on him to win that fight. A lot of people were mad at me because I did say I was leaning towards Basharat, of course, to win the fight via decision, but I clearly stated, you guys can go run the tape back on that episode, that the value was on Zahabi all day, okay? Because Basharat, Javid Basharat, one of the undefeated Basharat brothers, who I am very high on, didn't have a long list of fighting high-level opponents, and Zahabi is a very cerebral and underrated fighter, the brother of Firas Zahabi. I mean, his brother is literally one of the best coaches of all time, and Zahabi can land big strikes on you, too. He's a fighter that can knock you out. Knocked out Kuling Ayori before that, knocked out Draco Rodriguez in a couple fights before that, and he has solid boxing, okay? Doesn't have the best output, but if you slip up in there and you're in range, he'll hit you with a nasty hook. He can hurt you. Okay, he's a well-rounded fighter. I think that this is a very close fight. I like the fact that Zahabi has a 4-inch reach advantage. I feel that Zahabi has just a little bit more left to offer the game. He's a fighter that, although he's 36, he's not that young. He's a fighter that has just 13 professional fights. He doesn't have that wear and tear on him. And I think that he's taken a very good care of himself, knowing what his brother Firas Zahabi is about and what he preaches. They are on top of everything. And I think that Aiemann Zahabi has a lot left to offer the game. Well, I think Pedro Munhoz is a vehicle that's really been ran down. All right, he's kind of like a rental. Some teenagers are hopping in it. They're spinning out. They're doing donuts. They're really wearing the car out. All right, you got a teenager driving the car. Well, I think Zahabi is that. He's a vehicle that's been driven by that nice and safe old man who's checking the engine, changing the oil. I think he has left to offer. He has a lot more left to offer the game at this point in time, even though they're not that far apart in age. And I like that reach advantage. I'm siding with Zahabi here, guys. Some of you guys probably saw it coming. Siding with the underdog. He opened up as a plus 110. This fight now is creeping up to pick 'em odds. But Zahabi, you take a look at your sports book, and for the most part, you're seeing plus signs next to his name. He's right around plus 105, even odds. He's a slight dog. I like Zahabi here. All right, I just think that he's a reliable fighter. I think he can go out here and land a little bit more than Munhoz, and he's a fighter that should have the crowd behind him as well, representing Canada. In the welterweight division, we got Mike Malott taking on Trevin Giles. Michael Malott coming off that very tough L against Neil Magny. I do want to highlight the fact that he was looking great throughout that fight up until he wasn't, right? He kind of just fell into an unfortunate situation where he seemed to kind of gas out in that third round. Neil Magny used some of his wrestling skills to have success there. And Neil Magny is a stud. Okay, he's a stud. I mean, that guy, he just continues to grind, and he's a very long, rangy fighter that has wrestling to go along with the striking. That was just a major step up in competition for Mike Malott. Whether you guys wanted to understand that at the time, everyone was so high on Malott, myself included. I saw him land a nasty knockout in person. I was there for UFC 273 where he knocked out Mickey Gall. But the thing is, I did understand that he is a fighter that's been fighting low-level competition, even dating back to his victory on Dana White's Contender Series over Shimon Smitrotsky, finished him in seconds there. That was an official play of mine. I was very happy to see him go in there, get the contract. I've been hearing a lot of buzz about him training over at Team Alpha Male, and he's a fighter that has grappling skills to go along with some very fastly developing striking, and he shows to have a world of potential. But, you compare the victories of Johan Lainesse, Adam Fouguet, and Mickey Gall compared to the level of a fighter that Trevin Giles is, and you have to understand that Trevin is a step up. And I understand that Trevin is a fighter that has been getting finished. He's been taking some very tough losses as of recently, but look at the level of competition, the fighters that he's losing against. He's in there against way higher level fighters compared to whom Malott's been defeating, right? You talk about a Carlos Prates. Come on, man. This dude is just, he's proven to be a fighter that could be fighting for the belt one day. Gabriel Bonfim is nasty. He did have a victory over Preston Parsons before that. Also, let me just highlight and note that Giles did lose a grappling match to Malott at Fury Pro Grappling 6. So they grappled and Malott got the better of him there. But again, look at these other losses that Giles has taken too. Michael Morales, Dricus du Plessis, the champ. I mean, it's been pretty crazy. And he's had victories over fighters like James Krause, Roman Delize. And so just when you understand, you need to understand that Giles is a fighter that has taken his fair share of losses as of recently, but he's been fighting high-level fighters. And when he's hitting on all cylinders, he's a fighter that has some good boxing. He could sneak in his wrestling as well. And this is a fight that could play out much more competitively than the betting line's going to say, which we'll get to that here in a second. I will say Mike Malott gets the job done, and he is live to get a finish. You take a look at all of his victories. He's gotten finishes in every single one of them, and he could do it in a diverse manner. He could knock you out. He could sub you. I expect him to be extremely motivated here. The crowd will be behind him. He does not want to lose in front of his home crowd. I believe that last fight did take place in Canada too. He does not want to lose in front of his home crowd once again. But I'm not liking where the line is if you're back on Mike Malott. He is a -260 right now, okay? Over a 2.5 to 1 favorite against a fighter in Trevin who could really box with you. He could wrestle and he could be there, potentially be there in the later rounds. It could be very competitive. All in all, though, I'll say this. I say Malott bounces back with the finish here. And I'm going to say it's so hard to say whether he gets that knockout or sub because he could do it both so well. And I could see Malott hurting him, club and subbing him, hurting him, dropping him, and then snatching up a sub. I could see something like that happening. In fact, that's what I'll say. I'll say he hurts Giles and then even gets a sub, not the knockout. But the knockout could happen too. But I'm going to say he gets the finish. I hope he wins this fight. It'll be great for Canadian mixed martial arts. Like I said, we need to see more fighters representing Canada and taking the fight game up there to another level. They need to get a little bit of a resurgence behind them. And Malott is not that young, so he needs his victory. He's 32 years old. He needs to get this victory, and he needs to start getting some big wins after this. So, but I don't see a lot of value on that betting line. I don't. I think the value's on the underdog. If you're looking to bet this fight, I think you should be on Trevin Giles. Otherwise, you're sitting back and you're just seeing if Malott can rise to the occasion here, bounce back with a W. In the middleweight division, we got Marc-André Barrial taking on Dustin Stoltzfus. This is a fight that should deliver. Dustin Stoltzfus, I mean, this dude brings it. You take a look at some of his more recent fights. I mean, the Bruno Ferreira fight was crazy. He had a lot of success early in that first round, ended up slipping on a banana peel like he tends to do in those big fights and ends up getting finished. Abus Magomedov got that finish on him as well. Was finished by Gerald Mearshart, finished by Rodolfo Vieira. And those fights that get gritty, he kind of ends up making mistakes in there, at times, right? He's a solid grappler. Remember now, he had a victory on Joe Pyfer on Dana White's Contender Series, but it was a fight that some of you guys don't want to give complete merit to, which I understand. It was kind of a fluky sub, but you got to give him credit. They were kind of in that 50-50 position, working some type of judo throw there. And, Joe Pyfer went to frame with one of his arms as he was landing and shoulder popped out of place. But you got to give Stoltzfus some credit because they were fighting for that position. He kind of forced that to happen to an extent. But he's a fighter that has solid grappling skills. But the thing that stands out to me is his striking has really came around as well, right? He's a fighter that, he's a little stiff and he's a little upright with his striking, but he's been teeing off on dudes. The volume is starting to pick up as of recently. But you take a look at the numbers, it's really Marc-André who really pushes the pace with the volume. The nickname, the Power Bar, right? I believe his nickname is the Power Bar, and it's for a reason. Everyone talks about how he can go nonstop in the gym. I know he's a fighter that's gotten some work in over at Team Killcliff FC, and he surrounds himself with good people. And he's a fighter. You take a look at his line of work. He's a fighter that really only loses to high-level competition. I know he just got finished by Joe Pyfer, who we were just talking about. Joe Pyfer is one of the nastiest fighters in the game, bro. He's going to go out there. He's going to knock so many people out. He caught him there in the first round. But look at the fight before that. He had a competitive match with Chris Curtis. That fight went to a split decision. Victory over Eric Anders and Julia Marquez before that. Lost to Anthony Hernandez and Chidi Njokwani. These are high-level fighters, all right? And this was a fighter that came into the UFC and kicked off an 0-for-3 to start things off. And he was coming over to the UFC from the TKO scene. That's the promotion up in Canada. He was a double-weight champion. I believe it was in the middleweight and the light heavyweight division. People were hyped up on him. Came in with only one loss as a pro. People were expecting some big things from him. We talked about Canada being represented in the UFC. This was a fighter people were really hoping could be that dude. It never really turned out to be that, but he's been a fighter that's been entertaining. He's been fun to watch. And coming off that 3-fight losing skid. He started to put it together, and he snuck in his little victories here and there. And he's a well-rounded fighter, but the thing that he really thrives at is pushing the pace. And where I see him having success in this fight is, although Dustin's been looking good even early on in his fights, he's been shaping out and rounding out his skills. As this fight goes to the later rounds, I think that it's Marc-André that's the fighter that's more grounded and is making better decisions and can even potentially get a knockout. Dustin Stoltzfus, like I said, he's very stiff, he's very upright, and he'll put that offensive attack on you like he has as of recently, but he'll still be there to be countered and be clipped. I think Marc-André is a fighter that's a little bit more refined, more polished. He'll have a tighter guard and whatnot. I think he can come in, he can land some big shots, and I could see him getting a knockout here. I'm going to say that Marc-André gets a knockout. Marc-André Barriault gets a knockout on Dustin Stoltzfus. He gets a finish in this fight. Now, I'll say this much. I do feel that that's the case. That's the method of victory that I'm going for, but 2-1 odds, not crazy about the betting line there. This is another fight where I think there's possibly some value on the dog in Dustin Stoltzfus. You can grab as high as a plus 170, okay? He's not a bad fighter. He's a little bit unreliable, but if he survives any type of a finishing scenario, this is a fight that could play out very closely. And I could see Dustin having his moments in this fight, landing offensively. So just remember I told you guys that. But at the end of the day, I think he makes that one mistake again. I think he gets hurt. And I think that he loses his fight in the later rounds anyway. And with the crowd behind Marc-André Barriault, that's something that I like for him as well. And there's a lot more going on there. You got to favor him, but not sure if I have him 2-1. I have Marc-André Barriault more like a minus 170 here. So it's not that much of a reach, but just so you guys know where I stand there. Chow Machado, the Canadian, is dropping down to the light heavyweight division, right? He's a fighter that's been fighting up at the heavyweight division. He's coming into this fight 0-2 since joining the UFC. He's taking on Brenson Ribeiro. Brenson Ribeiro, a fighter that's fun to watch. He's a wild dude. He can go out there, he can knock you out, or he could show to be inadequate at times with his overall skill set. You saw in his last fight against a fighter that once upon a time was pretty highly regarded as a prospect, at least as far as I'm concerned, and Magomed Gatchiasulov. I pumped the brakes on Gatchiasulov. I mean, that was a fight that Magomed Gatchiasulov dug deep in and finished strongly and still ended up getting his hand raised, but he did not look good early on in that fight, and I think he shows to have holes in his game. So pump the brakes on him in case you were wondering. Besides that fight also showcased to us that Ribeiro is a fighter that he's lacking overall. He's definitely lacking overall, specifically with his takedown defense, his get-up game. He spent a lot of time on his back in that fight. Before that, he was knocked out against Xingming Yang. That was a fight that we were all kind of intrigued about going into it. We kind of had a feeling somebody was going to get the knockout. And before that, let's also not forget where he got the contract, getting that knockout against Bruno Lopez, as he was a big underdog. He landed that big strike in the first round, got the knockout. He's a dangerous dude. He has a crazy reach. I believe he has, an 81-inch wingspan for the division. He's a very long dude. He can knock you out. 5 knockouts out of his 15 victories. Also 5 subs. He's quite a fight finisher. In fact, there's 5 other unknown types, and I'm willing to bet that they're all finishes. They were early on in the Brazilian regional scene. They're probably all finishes. I mean, this is a fighter that's not really getting his hand raised if it goes to a decision, and we saw that again in his last fight. If he doesn't have that early success, if he doesn't get you out of there, you're probably going to lose, okay? Meanwhile, on the other hand, Chow Machado, I like the fact that he's dropping down in weight. I think that's a smart move for him because he's a fighter that he looks like he could shed some pounds. There's no question about that. So we'll see how he looks there. I'm kind of wondering if that will negatively affect or positively affect his cardio. We really don't know until we see him there for the first time in the division. I'm willing to guess that it'll benefit him just based on his overall physique. I think he'll look better there. We talked about the 2 losses that he's had since joining the UFC. Losses to Mick Parkin, who's a good fighter. A loss to Dontel Mays, who's kind of he's just, I don't know. He's not the best of fighters, but understand, we're still talking about a heavyweight that's a big boy. He trains with John Jones. He's got some skills. And just compare Dontel Mays to who Brenson Ribeiro has been fighting. Just understand that those are heavyweights there that have some pop on their strikes. And I think that Dontel Mays probably finishes Brenson Ribeiro or could take that fight. I think Mick Parkin takes out Brenson Ribeiro. So just kind of understand that. And we can quickly talk about the Kevin Saflarski fight, who Saflarski is just, let me not go in on him, but just a low-level fighter. And here's the thing. Chow Machado, a pretty measured striker. I think he may be slightly more grounded and polished with his striking, but Roberto is just, he has a lot of pop. Like I said, he's long. If we see a knockout in this fight, I think it's Roberto getting the knockout. But at the same time, you have to note that at times he's overly aggressive and he can be countered. Okay, so we can see him get knocked out like he did against Zing. And Chao Machado, half of his victories come by way of knockout. There's a potential for that too, but I'll lean more towards Brenson Roberto getting the knockout if we see one. Where I'm leaning towards Chao Machado's way is I have the crowd behind him fighting on this main card. I believe he's actually the last Canadian fighter fighting on the fight card. I think that he could use his grappling to control Roberto down on the mat, and that he could probably solidify a decision victory. That's an X factor there. We might see that decision victory for him, while he can also potentially set up a finish. Before working with the UFC from Dana White's Contender Series and all that, he is a fighter that was finishing quite often. The majority of his victories were coming by way of finish. And he's landing 6.07 strikes per minute, which was interesting to me as I was breaking down his tape. And I guess, a lot of his strikes, a little pitter patter going on and whatnot, kind of makes you think he doesn't have the best volume, but he pushed the pace on you a little bit there. And I think that the safer route to go here is taking Chao Machado, the hometown fighter who just seems to be a little bit more of a high fight IQ and a fighter that's more cerebral with going out there and getting the job done. Well, you have the wrecking machine, Roberto, who will be going out there balls to the wall, and he may find that finish, but if he doesn't, he'll make mistakes. He'll get capitalized on in one way or another. And I will take Machado to get the job done here. And Chao Machado is currently a minus 155. We have some slight action coming in on him. He opened up as a minus 165 on Bet US. And I think you could potentially, it's a tricky one, but I think you could argue that you're creeping up towards maybe some value on Machado's name or next to his name. Just you have a safe fighter there, a fighter that's hungry as well. He's hungry to get that W, needs to get a W, and he's fighting a fighter that will make mistakes, and he could potentially take advantage of that. And I'm going to say he actually wins a decision. We may see some boring stalling out down on the mat, and we'll see if he could try to work a finish, but I'll go decision route for Machado. Here we go. The Black Beast is back. He's taken on, I don't want to say a young up-and-comer, right? He's 33 years old, is Jonathan Deniz, but he's a newer to the MMA game, right? Comes in with that kickboxing background, comes off Dana White's Contender Series recently. He's a new face of the game. Derek Lewis is a true veteran, so there is a stylistic clash there. You have to understand that. Look at the difference in amount of professional fights these fighters have. Derek Lewis now has 41 professional fights compared to the 8 professional fights of Deniz. I will say, though, Deniz has looked pretty good. He's a sharp striker. He really is, and he can knock anybody out in this heavyweight division. I truly believe that. Maybe I'm throwing that around a little bit too recklessly, but in the heavyweight division, you sit there and you trade, he has the potential to knock out anybody on their right night, okay? Now, of course, when you're talking about the cream of the crop of Tom Aspinall, of course, he's going to be changing levels and he's going to be styling on you, but I liked what I've seen from Deniz standing up. He's good. He's technical there. Carl Williams had absolutely nothing for him in that fight. That was a very frustrating fight if you were backing Carl Williams like I was, especially when you saw Carl Williams finally go to the grappling and take that third round. Okay, so in that third round, he did showcase once again that Deniz has questionable grappling and questionable takedown defense, as Austin Lane had success in their fight in the first round as well. If you remember, Austin Lane got on top of him, but in the second round, Deniz, the fight started back on the feet, and he showcased he can knock you out. Like I said, he's dangerous there. Had the knockout over Eduardo Neves on Dana White's Contender Series. He's been knocking everybody out for the most part. I mean, even if you look at his kickboxing matches, a ton of knockouts there. I mean, he's a true knockout artist. And as far as his 8 professional wins go, only one of them have been by decision. Okay. Now, Derek Lewis is the king of the knockout, so you have to understand that first and foremost. He's, of course, live to get his own knockout, but I actually think that Derek Lewis has a more well-rounded skill set. I could actually see Lewis getting on top of Deniz and smashing him down on the mat. Okay, I know that may have some of you guys scratching your head, but Deniz is lacking there, and Derek Lewis is a wrecking ball. He could bump him down to the mat and in one weird way or another get on top of him and smash him. All right, Derek Lewis is a more well-versed mixed martial artist with a ton of experience. All right, so Derek Lewis has more ways to win this fight. You saw him against Rodrigo Nascimento in his last fight, just always in it, always looking for that knockout. Doesn't matter how late in the fight it is. Let me tell you what, Derek Lewis, out of any fighter in the UFC, I've incorrectly picked Derek Lewis's fights more than anybody. Okay, if I pick him to win, he loses. If I pick him to lose, he wins. It's been brutal. Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit. Maybe I got in the way a little bit here and there with a W on him, betting against him or whatnot, or betting for him. But I'll let you know one that stands out like crazy to me. One of the most brutal L's I've ever taken. It was the Alexandr Volkov loss with 1 second left on the clock. I was in Las Vegas for that fight. That was for the Khabib-McGregor fight. Okay, all right, me and everyone had tickets in our hands. I was telling everybody to put the house on Volkov. Everybody was congratulating me before the fight ended. Volkov was breaking a statistical record throughout that fight, and then Lewis still getting up, looking for that knockout, gets it. And we've seen him do that time and time and again. You think about the Marcin Tybura fight, he did it in that fight in the third round. He's done it so often, man. The Shamil Abdurakhimov fight, late knockout for him there. He's done it time and again, and he is always live to get a knockout, okay? People talk about how maybe his cardio isn't the best. I mean, maybe I've said that in the past. It's really not that bad. I mean, he paces himself. He'll explode back up to his feet, and he'll look to knock you out. I like Derek Lewis here, man. I think you guys kind of see where this is going. Now, I'll just say this much real quick. Derek Lewis has been prone to being knocked out. Even though he's the knockout artist, he actually gets knocked out quite often, which not a lot of people realize. Even dating back to, you want to talk about a phenomenal fight, you go run the tape back on the, first off, the Sean Jourdain knockout was nasty. I met Sean Jourdain too. If you remember Sean Jourdain, he was a fighter that fought in Strikeforce. He was a former LSU defensive lineman who was huge and could do backflips, a big dude there. And he had a nasty knockout on Derek Lewis. This was early on in his career. Lewis was getting knocked out often. The Matt Mitrione knockout, that fight lasted 41 seconds. They were mean mugging each other before the fight. That fight was sick. And you talk about another football player, Matt Mitrione, the former New York Giant, a stud athlete. I mean, you run the tape back on that fight for all you new fans. Matt Mitrione starches him in the first round. What a crazy fight. But we've seen Derek Lewis knocked out, man. I mean, the Mark Hunt knockout loss. He was knocked out by JDS. I know we're talking about some high-level fighters here, but when he gets hit hard, he will crumble a little bit. Cyril Gane, Taito Ivasa, Sergey Pavlovich. I mean, these fighters are all finishing him. And Deniz has high-level kickboxing. I think there's potential for Deniz to get a knockout here, but of course there's potential for Lewis to get his own knockout. I like Lewis to win this fight because I actually could see him getting on top of Deniz and smashing his face in through the canvas with some nasty ground and pound as well. And I really hope we see him try to exploit Deniz's takedown defense. I would love to see that from him. It would be nasty. Give me the Black Beast to get the job done here. Let's take a look at the betting line here. I think we're going to find some value on it. He's currently a plus 135. Okay, I think there is value on the Black Beast. This fight, I mean, you could find him as high as a plus 145 right now. And that has me scratching my head a little bit. I mean, we'll take a look and see how Lewis looks on the scales. We'll see how motivated he looks and what kind of shape he's in. But I think he's hungry to get a W here. I do. And I think the Black Beast is hungry for a W. He's coming off a win. Maybe he wants to make one more run at this thing. I don't know. 39 years old is not necessarily ancient in the heavyweight division. I just hope that he's eating healthy and he's kind of maintaining himself. But I think the value is on Derek Lewis, and I say he gets a ground and pound knockout in the first or second round. So we got two big flyweight matchups to top the card off. First, in the co-main event, we had a women's flyweight matchup between Erin Blanchfield, ranked number 3, and Rose Namajunas, ranked number 5. Just to brush upon what's on the line here, of course, Valentina Shevchenko rightfully snatches her belt back. It should have never left her arms. She's the current champ. I believe that Manon Fiorot should be the next fighter for her, who Manon's been on an absolute tear. She's coming in off the victory over Erin Blanchfield. That was Blanchfield's last loss, handing Erin Blanchfield her first loss in the UFC. She had one loss early on in her career, but I think that Manon will be next for Valentina Shevchenko. And the winner of this fight between Erin Blanchfield and Rose Namajunas is going to be in the mix, but you also have to note, so Manon probably fights Valentina, and then you also have Natalia Silva and Macy Barber really making noise in this division. I think that Macy Barber should face Natalia Silva. Maybe the winner of Blanchfield and Namajunas takes on Alexa Grasso. It's really hard to say who's going to get that next title shot. The top of this division is pretty stacked right now, which is a good thing, which is really a good thing. This division's starting to really pan out. I'm glad that Rose Namajunas joined the mix here, the former strawweight champion of the world. Erin Blanchfield, let's talk about that loss that she took in her last fight against Manon Fiorot. Really showed that when she cannot have success with her grappling, she's limited as a striker. She'll look to push the pace and try to put some volume on you, but technically she's limited, doesn't have a lot of power. And I think that the upper echelon fighters in this division will really style on her there. And when they can stuff her takedown, she's going to be in for a long night. And right off the rip, I think I'll give you the cheat sheet Rose Namajunas is a very well-rounded fighter who has some of the sharpest striking in the game. She could stuff your takedown. She has nasty jiu-jitsu. I think Rose Namajunas is going to be a tough matchup for her here. And we'll just highlight some of the work that she's been doing because it has been impressive before the Monin fight. Victories over Talia Santos, Jessica Andrade, Molly McCann, JJ Aldrich, and Miranda Maverick. The Miranda Maverick fight was impressive. Went out there and ragdolled her. That's where she really put her name on the map. But I did not like the way that she looked in that last fight. You do note that she's just 25 years old with a lot of room for growth. She's very motivated after losing that fight in her home state with the crowd behind her. I'm sure it was a tough night for her. But I just don't know in such a short period of time how much she can enhance her skills and how much she could sharpen up and actually try to compete with the fighter of Rose Namajunas' level. The former champ is just 32 years old. She's going to be jabbing her nose off. She's going to be stuffing takedowns. I like Rose Namajunas to get the job done here. Rose comes into this fight on a 2-fight winning streak, taking out Tracy Cortez, looked good in that fight, took out Amanda Ribas. These are high-level fighters. She lost to Monin, but Monin is the fighter fighting for the belt next, and realistically, Monin could be the next champ. And you guys know I love me some Valentina Shevchenko, but Monin's looking really good. She had that loss where she lost the belt against Carla Esparza. What a weird fight that was. There was no activity thrown in that fight, and she just had a mental lapse in there. She could have easily won that fight just pumping her jab, and she didn't. She was scared to be taken down. But let's not overlook the Weili Zhang victories, because Weili Zhang is just such a phenomenal fighter. And Rose rose up to the occasion and took victories over fighters like Weili Zhang, Joanna Jacek. I mean, she has some huge victories under her belt, and I'm taking her to win this fight. I gave you guys the recipe to victory. It's just stuffing takedowns and jabbing Erin Blanchfield's face off. And even if Blanchfield wants to force those wrestling takedowns, Rose has nasty jiu-jitsu. Don't be surprised if she pulls off some kind of reversal or pulls off a sub as well. All right, so just keep an eye on that because Rose is very, very technical there. Rose has 8 submissions out of 13 victories. All right, we've seen her going out there pulling off subs back from the Ultimate Fighter days when she had hair and all that. And I like Rose Namajunas to win this fight, and I think that she wins a unanimous decision. That takes us to the main event. We're now in the men's flyweight division. A lot's on the line here too. Brandon Moreno taking on Amir Albazi. Let's take a look at the top of this division. Alexandra Pantoja will be taking on Kai Asakura, the fighter that the UFC just signed, coming over from Japan, who's a very talented fighter. Excited to see how that fight plays out. He gets the instant title shot after being signed. I like that. He shakes the division up. I'd much rather see Kai get that title shot than what some other people were talking about as far as Kai Kara-France getting a title shot after the amazing knockout victory over Steve Erceg. But can we not forget he was coming off 2 losses in a row? I mean, you cannot get a title shot being 1-2 in your last 3 fights. I don't like that. All right, so I'll just say that much. But just if you want to understand what's going on with this division right now, Brandon Royval is hot. He just dug deep, had that 5th round, that very strong 5th round where he took the fight against Tetsuro Taira. His title aspirations have to be put on ice for a little bit. You guys know I'm very high on him, but came down to that 5th round. I mean, I still think that he's going to make a run at it one day. The back control that he has is so nasty, but Royval is really starting to hit on all cylinders. We'll see what he could do. And Royval just has a recent victory over Brandon Moreno too, right? Brandon Moreno is 0-2 in his last 2 fights, both via split decision, although the Royval fight should not have been a split decision. The Pantoja fight was for the belt. That was a close one too, but Moreno losing to the top level fighters in this division. But just real quick, let's just sum this up. The winner of this fight, if Amir Albazi wins this fight, I mean, he's still undefeated in the UFC, and we're talking about him being on a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He'll be on a 6-fight winning streak, then having a victory over a former champ too. I mean, you gotta kind of throw his name in the hat to get a title shot, especially if he goes out there and he shows up and gets a finish. But it's really hard to say who's going to be next because Royval might be next, and for Kai Kara-France may be one more knockout victory from being right in the mix as well. He needs to get one more fight. So that's kind of what's going on here. At the end of the day, let's just make it simple. The winner of this fight will be in the mix. This is huge for them, okay? Brandon Moreno coming into this fight on a 2-fight losing skid. I think he's going to be very motivated. He's just 30 years old. I think he has a lot more to offer the game. I think those 2 losses are really going to hype him up and get him ready for a fighter like Amir Albazi, who's 17-1. He does not lose. I mean, not literally because he has lost before, but I mean, you guys know what I'm saying. He doesn't lose in the UFC, His last loss came by way of Jose Shorty Torres. That was at Brave CF 23. A lot of you guys probably know Shorty Torres. He fought in the UFC for a brief period of time. I don't understand why the UFC didn't keep him around. He's kind of a strong personality, but Amir Albazi favors his grappling, to say the least here. I think Brandon Moreno is the more well-rounded fighter. If Moreno can keep this fight standing, I think he could have a lot of success with his striking. Although Amir Albazi is technical with his striking, but I just think that Moreno is more diverse and can land a big shot. And Albazi doesn't put a lot of output out there, just 2.8 strikes landed per minute compared to Moreno's 3.87. Moreno is a lot more battle-tested and proven against higher-level opponents. You think about, what was it, the trilogy? Was it 3 or 4 fights again with Figueiredo, which those fights were very interesting. I want to highlight those here for a second. So he fought him 1, 2, 3, 4 times. That's right. We had the draw. What was so crazy about those fights is the fact that every time they fought, there was so much, it played out so differently. And that's one thing I don't like to an extent too, because Moreno at times didn't look so good in some of those fights, you know, right? You think about the, which one was it? Well, the one he lost, obviously, he didn't look the best in that fight. That was the third fight. It's just, there was a lot of up and down type of performances, but the last one, he had that 3rd round KO and he looked damn good in that fight. If we see more of that Moreno, he's going to do just fine in this fight. I mean, that version of himself was phenomenal. You know, and these 2 losses that he just had, the Royval fight didn't look the best, but maybe we were a little bit, or I was a little bit more down on Royval's skills. He's really proven to be a high level fighter. So maybe you kind of analyze that fight and you analyze it differently. You understand that it was just, he was fighting a very high level fighter, and Moreno is still him. And I think Moreno is the more well-rounded fighter. He'll have a 2-inch reach advantage. I want to see him keep this fight on the feet. He's the larger fighter. Like I said, the more diverse striker. A lot of people thought that Amir Albazi lost that fight to Kai Kara-France in that last one, that 5-round decision he had. Besides that, has not defeated anyone worth noting. Okay, Zalga Zumagula proved to be a nobody. Francisco Figueiredo, the brother of Devison, it's not the same as fighting Devison Figueiredo, obviously the much better Figueiredo brother. Alessandro Costa, good fighter, and Kai Kara-France is a good fighter, but again, that was a close fight that some people thought he lost. So not near the same resume is the point I'm making here. I like Brandon Moreno to get the job done. I'm going to cut to the chase here. Brandon Moreno right now on BetUS is a -155. I see that line a lot higher on some other books. I've seen him as high as a -180. I think there's some decent value on the -155 line. I think Moreno gets the victory here. It'll be good for the division. I would like to see Moreno hold his name towards the top of this division and get some of those big fights in this division once again. So I'm rooting for him. Hope he gets the job done, and it should be a good one. Give me Moreno to win this fight via unanimous decision. All right, boys, that's going to wrap up UFC Edmonton. Remember, even with these small cards, there's always spots that make some money. I'm excited for this one. I think we keep the streak going. I think we profit in a major way. If anybody wants to work with me, reach out to me, and I'll give you some further details there. Please go follow me on Instagram and Twitter. Please like this video. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Putting in a lot of work over here. I've been sitting here chopping it up on the mic for quite a bit. And like I said in the beginning, man, I'm under the weather. You could probably hear it in my voice. I'm a little sick. It's that time of year. Always at the end of the year, man. Last year was brutal. I was sick left and right. Hopefully this one's not as bad, but here we go right away. Didn't even make it to Halloween without catching something, but we'll be good. We'll be just fine, guys. I'll leave you with some parting words. I'll say this much. And this is off the cuff, if that's the saying, right off the cuff. I'm going to start pushing some content on IG like I did, and I've been putting it here in the reels and whatnot, and even just on the mic, just talking here on the channel for my long-term videos. And I'm going to give you guys my thoughts on what's going on in the fight game. I hope you guys don't take it too personal. I saw a lot of people getting so upset about the what I was saying about Holloway. And I'll tell you guys this much, especially for you youngsters out there, man. Sometimes you got to just learn to have a little bit of thicker skin and don't let these small things get you so upset. Because I see you guys in the comment section and you guys are just like pulling your hair out. You guys need to like ground yourself. And I'm not trying to say this like talking down to you guys. Seriously, saying this as I like to give my closing thoughts. I just think that it could benefit you guys. I try to tell myself this, right? So put it like that. These are things I tell myself. Don't ever take this stuff serious. When I see you guys coming at me in the comment section, I don't let it get to me at all. I laugh it off. Life's too short for that. Don't get caught up with negative comments or people that are negative to you. Focus on what you're doing. I want to be myself and I want to give my thoughts on these things, right? A lot of people didn't like my thoughts as far as Max Holloway not meeting Ilya Taporia in the middle of the cage when he pointed his finger. Now that's how I feel. It's just, we'll agree to disagree, but it's all good. You guys have your thoughts too. It's all good, guys. You don't got to go crazy if everyone doesn't agree with you, or don't get caught up in sweating these small things. All right, guys, because we love the fights, but remember, just make sure you're focused on your real tasks in your life and make sure you're happy. Don't waste any time being upset with the nonsense. Think about that, guys, and focus what you guys really want to be getting done out there in your lives, and focus on what your goals are, especially youngsters. You youngsters are at a pivotal time in your lives. You got to make the right decisions to get your life going in the right trajectory. You know what I'm trying to say? When you're in your 20s, your early 20s, your mid 20s, getting to your late 20s, you're at a pivotal point. Make sure you're being smart, you're happy, and you're focused on the right things. I'll leave you guys with that. What else? That's it. I'll catch you guys on Instagram and Twitter. Go follow me. I'll be pumping content out all week. Signing out. Teller.
The teller.